Hello, hello, hello. So tonight is actually the first time that I've gone live in a while. I usually go live after the finish of a book, and the finishing of the book actually ended a few nights ago with Isaiah. And when we are looking at some of these books that, as you know, if you're following along on this journey, I've written a devotional called Rinse, Reflect, Repeat. And it's basically a guide to walking through the Bible alphabetically in a year. And through the course of this year, I have been just doing a podcast and doing videos about each day. And after every single book or most of the books, I go live. Well, this month actually happens to have just 3 books, and one of those books was Isaiah, and Isaiah was pretty lengthy. And so it's been a while since I've gone live, and then we just finished the book of James the last couple of days. Well, I wanted to kind of summarize the book of Isaiah and James as well. But first, Isaiah, as you guys probably know, the book of Isaiah is a major prophetic Bible or book in the Bible in the Old Testament. And what's really difficult sometimes is reading these books because, not only is there a lot of judgment that's on on the Israelites, but there's consequences of Israel's sin that we read about and their rebellion that we read about. And yet the book of Isaiah, even though there's some warnings about that, the book of Isaiah promises a future Messiah and the restoration of Jerusalem. And this book offers a vision of God's holiness, and that's really what we've got to look at. And so there's a lot of it that entails in the book of Isaiah. You've got prophecy and judgment. You've also got hope and promise. You've also got God's character in the book of Isaiah. And there's different sections in it that, will talk about his justice as well and his mercy. And, my intention of my book is to try and bring out the relevancy of these books in the Bible and, offering insights into who God is and what he has called you to do and his plan for the world, and to challenge people like yourself to live a righteous and just life, full of compassion, and really draw out your purpose and what that would look like. And so I hope that my challenges throughout the course of my devotional was actually a part of that, and just bringing and nurturing the overall theme of the book of Isaiah with these challenges and reflections. I hope you enjoyed some of the devotions and how that we can make even the book of Isaiah relevant. I remember writing about the one day that I talked about the faces in the dark, and how important that was for me to realize that, every person in faith has a different role, has a different reason for, their purpose. And my purpose will be different than other people's purposes, and yet are all encompassing towards God's kingdom. And the Faces in the Dark story that I shared with you guys, it was way back on May the 2nd. I don't know if any of you would remember it, but it was basically the story of how I, was on this vision of this mountain, and God wanted me to go down to the edge of this mountain, and I saw these faces in this darkness everywhere, and those faces were crying out. And I feel like that's the kind of the overall theme of the book of Isaiah, that, God, and he used prophets to really, call out and answer the call of those people who are crying out. And I guess the question would be, we have to be ready for that in our lives when, God calls us to do something. And I feel like that's a lot of the book of Isaiah, is just a walk of obedience, reading about God's character, and, obviously understanding the discipline of God as well. Because, I don't know if you remember the story that I wrote about. Go get the wooden spoon. How that, when I would tell my kids to go and get the wooden spoon in the bedroom, and they knew that they had done something and were going to get swatted. It's the swat was never actually hurtful. They admitted it later. It was like, Mom, your spankings never hurt us. And my kids never really got a lot of spankings, but it mirrors how that God has to discipline us as well. And I feel like that Isaiah was really strong on really trying to get holiness out of us, and out of the Israelites. But we're not supposed to idolize things. And I don't know if you remember the story that I wrote about when I started the acting world, how that God told me to never idolize the platform that he puts us on. And I think that that can be relatable to all of us, because when we are growing like Isaiah, throughout the book, just challenging all of us to grow, when we are growing like that, and then we start to get opportunities to speak, or get opportunities to share his word, or get opportunities to shine forth our giftings, whatever you are doing, God's going to continue to grow. And when we get those opportunities, we should never idolize that platform that God puts us on, because then when we are idolizing that platform, then we're taking our eyes off of Jesus. And I think that overall, throughout the book of Isaiah, again, it just, not only is it talking about us growing and getting more holy, and especially talking about obedience, but just really making sure that we are representing our faith well, and that we're growing, and learning how to obey, even on a tighter ship, I guess, is what you would if you will. And ultimately, we want to be effective. We want to be shining forth God's love as we live our lives. And that's how we become history makers, right? Even if it's just for a small portion of people, God wants to use our lives, because salvation is for everyone. And that, again, is part of the theme, I think, of, Isaiah. And then, we will grow into being as eagles. And that is what I hope that this devotional does for all of you guys, is it helps for all of us to grow. And I don't know if you remember the devotional. It was one of my very favorite. It was all about being a conductor of nature's choir. I love how that even in the book of Isaiah, when he's in the midst of preaching and prophesying and telling all of the people that you've got to obey, and you've got to make things right, he still brings forth a message of joy and hope. And even the rocks and the forests and the mountains will cry out. And uh, getting that perspective is always, a fun for me, because I love that song that I mentioned in the devotional. I honestly just think that the book of Isaiah has so much richness to it, but it also talks about faith. And I mentioned that in that devotional page where I was talking about May flowers, and how that oftentimes we put more faith in the flowers that come forward in spring than we sometimes will do when we're trying to trust God for something for our lives. And admitting some of those things is always, can be difficult, but the book of Isaiah is so rich in pointing things out, and just helping us to grow. And then I talked about fasting, how that fasting is important in our daily, or our whole lifestyle, and being somebody who fasts will continue to help us grow closer to Jesus. And there's differing views on what fasting is, and whether it be fasting from our mouth or distractions in our lives. If God's showing you to let something go, he wants to draw himself closer to you. And that's important, because ultimately, when we grow, whether it's fasting or other ways of obedience, it can be a little painful and uncomfortable, but that's where our growth spurts come to life. And I shared a story about Haley, my oldest daughter, having growth spurts and hurting, like her legs were actually hurting her. And, that's kind of how we are as well when we are growing in our faith. Sometimes it can actually sting a little bit. Um, and that was a story from yesterday. And yesterday we talked about James, and today we talked about James in the podcast. And I love the book of James because it's such a practical guide to Christian living. And I mentioned this too, how that some people actually view the book of James as this how-to book. If you are literally wanting to just jump in and just read a short book on what it's like to be a Christ follower and the importance of faith being demonstrated through actions, James is the book. It talks about the faith. It talks about enduring trials. It talks about having wisdom and living out, their faith, to honor God and to serve people. And so the book of James is so key when it talks about faith and works, and how true faith is not just this mindset or this intellectual kind of thing, but it is truly demonstrating action. And so, we finished with the book of Isaiah, and then the last 2 days we've been on James. And so if you haven't read James, it would be a great short book. It's only 6 chapters, I believe. And even in the book of James, there's trials and testings that are mentioned, and how that James encourages Christ followers to see trials as opportunities to actually grow. And that's where I was talking about the growth spurts. Those are opportunities to grow and to have wisdom, and yet to realize that we are but a vapor here on this life, and we want to live our lives for God and to do everything that we possibly can for him, because when he guides us and when we live for him, then that little fingerprint of history is going to endure and to be around, for a long time, hopefully. And yet also too, in James, he talks about the importance of prayer, and even praying for the sick and for God's intervention in really difficult situations. So it's really a great practical guide. And I love the book of James. It's such a rich, just an easy manual basically for all of us as Christ followers. And I hope you enjoyed today's story about no more regrets. If you haven't listened to the podcast this morning, it's a fun little story of how I asked Nathan, if he had any regrets. And he said, yes, I have 2 regrets. And I, shared the story of what those 2 regrets are, or were anyway, and how we resolved them. And, that I shared that story because, in the book of James, it talks about how we are but a vapor. And when we live a life that, there are regrets, then how can we, how can we fix that? What can we do to, lay our head down at night and say, I have no regrets now? I think that we'll always have some level of regret of something, because we aren't perfect. But that was a fun little story for me to share, because it was a really neat year for us when we actually had those regrets alleviated from my husband's mind. And so I shared that story. But anyway, I enjoyed talking to you guys tonight. I know Isaiah was a really long book, and yet there's a lot of adults that have never read that book. A lot of adults, and there's a lot of adults that have never read the Bible through in a year. And that's I'm just hoping that this devotional encourages you guys to not just read the Bible, but again, make it applicable to your daily life. And that's what's kind of been fun for me to get this book out there. And tomorrow we start on Jeremiah. It's another long book, and we will not finish it by the end of June. Or no, we're still in May. I'm way far ahead. We're not going to finish it in the book of May. So what I'll do is probably go live again at the end of May, and then just talk about the days that we covered in the book of, in this first part. But it does overlap and goes into June. So anyway, I hope you guys are enjoying tonight, and I hope you guys have a really great Memorial weekend, and that you're out there shining forth God's light. And certainly reach out to me if any of you have stories to share. I love hearing the stories of people that are walking through and reading the devotional and going through all of the challenges and all the things. It makes my heart happy. So enjoy your rest of your night, and I look forward to talking with you guys soon. So until tomorrow, keep rinsing, reflecting, and repeating. God bless you guys. I love you all so very much.